Hi, everybody. This is Lauren Kramer with More Miles Run Coaching, and I am here with Michelle Zahn of More Miles Run Coaching. We are both certified run coaches as well as certified performance nutrition coaches. This is the first in a series of nutrition education videos that we are going to be putting out. And today we are going to be covering how to periodize your nutrition with the periodization of your run training. So we are here at the end of the spring season, coming into an off season, off of your big recovery or off of your big goal for the season. And so that's what we're going to be focusing on, is how to adjust your nutrition to your off season of run training. We are working toward a big goal every season, whether that is a half marathon, a 5K, an ultra marathon. You have been putting in a lot of work, high volume of running miles, a lot of intensity. A lot of the nutrition focus during that time is pushing a lot of carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are your energy source. And when we're doing frequent high intensity training, frequent volume, especially coming into the week of your race, we tend to really push carbohydrates as a big focus of your training. However, you reach your big A goal, you did it, yay. And then things change. We go into, let's start at the beginning. Typically after you've done a big goal, you are going to have about a week off. Now, off is not necessarily going to mean complete rest, but we are taking down the intensity drastically. Either you're not running and you're doing some walking, maybe some light strength, some light cross training, no intensity during that first week after your race. So Michelle, let's start there. You just did a big race. Regardless of the distance, you've put in a big effort. How do we approach our nutrition after that big event in the first several days right after?
Yeah, so those first several days, you really are working on replenishing you do need some more carbs because you have to replenish your glycogen stores, and that's going to depend on the length of your race for how long you need to do that. You really need to boost your protein intake, and I would say a minimum of 1 gram per pound of body weight at a minimum. And again, that might fluctuate depending on your race intensity and distance. And then, taking a week off of tracking. If you've been tracking, you need that mental break. So just eat by your hunger. Don't worry as much about all of that once you've gotten through that first 24 hours. And, also in that first 24 to 48 hours, you should be working on replenishing your electrolytes and rehydrating, especially if you've run half marathon or longer. You probably depleted a good amount of that. So following your recovery, I would say take that first week off and just kind of enjoy sitting around and eating and being hungry and eating when you feel like it, and not eating carbs after that first 24 to 48 hours. You don't have to load all that glycogen, and just kind of relax for a minute.
I think that's a really good point. I think a lot of people who train specifically for events, we tend to be very, maybe not even type A totally, but type A in our training, that we are very regimented, and you've been working really hard for a while. I mean, we're talking about months here leading up to a goal. So I think that's great advice to make sure you're replenishing, again, just to repeat what Michelle said, replenishing your carbohydrates from the big effort you just did, making sure that you are getting enough protein because you've just done some damage to your muscles. And that's only productive damage if you're healing your muscles. We need protein to do that. But then relax, take a minute. It's good for your brain in addition to your body to let go for a minute. Okay, so one point that I want to emphasize, when we are training up to reach your current peak fitness for your goal race. We reach it, ideally, we are in peak condition for your goal race, but peak physical condition is not a sustainable state. That's not a state that we stay. In order to continue to grow, we have to work toward your peak condition. Then we take a recovery period to let your body heal and recover. And then we continue to build upward. So it is normal and natural that you should be losing some fitness in your recovery block after your race. However, it's still important to adjust your nutrition to your recovery period when you're doing less volume, less intensity. So acknowledging that we are going to lose some fitness, and that's not only healthy, but it's important. I think most people also are wary of gaining weight, not feeling good about themselves during that recovery period. So let's talk about that. When we're going through a typical recovery period for most athletes is going to be anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks, maybe a little bit longer than that, depending on the timing of your goal races for the spring and your next upcoming goal race. But how do we, for that period of time when we're running less, how do we avoid that dreaded weight gain or not feeling good about ourselves? How do we adjust nutrition to reflect our lower intensity, lower volume training?
Yeah, so that's it's something a lot of us have fallen victim to, and I've definitely gotten that post-race weight gain before. The biggest thing you can do to, I guess, kick this off and keep your body composition in check and or change it if that's what your goal, because you don't want to change your body composition during peak training. You can't.
That's a great point.
You want to do this during your base training, during your off season before we get into high intensity work. So the first step is to know what you're doing. You have to track what you're doing now so you know where you're going, and we can determine whether you have too many calories coming in or too few, because that's also an issue. So something like Chronometer, that's like my favorite go-to tracking app. Or some other app that can sync with your Garmin, sync with your activity tracker, whatever that is, and kind of get an estimate for what you're taking in and an estimate for what you're burning. But keeping in mind that those are both estimates. So your tracker could be off by 30%, calorie counts and Chronometer might not be right. You may not be able to measure your food all the time, so you're guessing. There's a lot of just knowing that this is like a guideline. It's not a hard number that you're looking at. You're trying to see about what you're eating now versus about what you're burning. And then we can kind of bring those two numbers together to either sustain your weight, gain weight if you're looking to build muscle, or lose fat if you're looking to lose that.
That's a great point. I think especially during peak training, our appetites are high and we tend to just eat what looks good and grab a lot. And that's okay. I think that's healthy and important during a training cycle. But that's great advice on how to adjust, because sometimes you get in the habit then of eating a lot, eating frequently throughout the day. And so just to be able to have a sense of where you are is really helpful. That's good advice.
It is hard. I mean, I know, like, just for me, like, it's 3 weeks post goal race for me, or 4 weeks now, I guess. And I'm still trying to bring that hunger down.
Right.
It takes a while. It's not going to be instant. It's not like you can cut it off. You're still like, it's going to take some effort and some discipline to bring it back down, but you have to know where you are to know where you need to go.
Exactly. Good. That's great. So let's talk a little bit about macronutrients. Just in a general sense, I think, again, during training and during recovery, our macronutrient needs might look a little bit different. So let's start there. Let's start with protein, because we were talking about that in our week after focus. What should our protein consumption look like when we're in this recovery block?
So I would still maintain protein. Like, I keep protein pretty consistent throughout the year. Because like you said, you don't want to lose that lean mass. You've worked hard all year to gain it, and you don't want to risk losing it. And a lot of us are building up our strength training or cross training during this time. So you don't want to compromise any of those gains that you've made. So I would say a minimum for endurance athletes, a minimum of 1 gram of protein per pound of body fat, or body weight, not body fat, per pound of body weight. If you look up like typical nutrition recommendations, it may go down to 0.6, but athletes need far more than that. That's for like a sedentary person who's not lifting, who's not running, who's not cross training. So I would say at least 1 gram per pound of body weight at a minimum. And that's a lot of protein.
It is a lot of protein. And I think a lot of people are shocked by that number. But, again, like you said, looking at endurance athletes, we are exercising every single day. We are a little bit different than the general population because of, even in a recovery block, again, intensity and volume is lower, but we're still probably exercising, if not every day, most days of the week. And when you're looking at the year as a whole, you are still doing a lot of work across the year. So,
right.
Yeah, it's a big number, but you're right. When you're doing that much activity and that sustained duration, that's the number to shoot for.
Yeah.
Okay, what about carbohydrates? This is a really common question that I get because, again, we're coming off of a big season, a big race. We've been carb loading probably usually for that week before the race. Do we still need to consume carbohydrates in the same way during our recovery season, our recovery block?
No, I would say after those first couple days after your race, where you do still need a lot of carbohydrates and you might be sick of them, you're still going to need them for that first 24 to 48 hours just to replenish. And once you've gotten through that and you're back into true recovery, and you're going to base training, the carbs should be dialed down. So like where your protein and fat intake may stay pretty consistent throughout the year and fluctuate slightly, your carbohydrate, that's where your game changer is. So off season, you're going to be backing off the carbohydrates a lot. It's going to seem like you're on a low carb diet. I know I feel like that sometimes when you look at the number, it's not low carb. It's just lower than we're used to.
Right.
And the type of carbohydrate changes. So where, pasta, toast, sweet potatoes, grains were all a huge thing before your race. Now we're going to shift that focus to fruits and vegetables as your primary focus. So, prioritizing what you put on your plate, protein should come first, and then your fruits and vegetables second before any grains make their way to your plate. So the nutrient dense fruits and veggies, leafy greens, fiber intake should kind of make sure you're getting that in there just for general health. And then, supplementing if you feel like you aren't getting enough calories in the day, then you can start adding in some of those grains and starches. And even when you start building up those short speed workouts or those longer runs, you can start building that back in slowly, but it's kind of a teeter totter. So you go from high carb, high training down to low carb, easier training. And I say low carb, I don't mean low carb, I mean lower carb.
So maybe even focusing like on nutrient dense carbohydrates as opposed to, we're talking about grains, toast, crackers, things like that we use during training to get those quick boosts of carbohydrate that we don't need. Focusing more on the higher fiber, higher nutrient carbohydrates as we are in a recovery block.
Right. The slower release kind of carbohydrates. We don't need the quick fixes. We don't need juices, added sugars, like that all the stuff we've been promoting for months now needs to kind of fall back
right.
off the plate.
Right. Awesome. So focusing on micronutrients a little bit more during the off season. Okay. What about fats? We don't talk about fats a whole lot. What do you think about adjusting your fat intake during the recovery block?
So fats actually at this point, they can stay consistent depending where you are. And that's where that tracking comes in really useful to see how much you're eating. And fats is kind of in the middle of the protein and carb thing. They don't stay as steady as protein, but they don't fluctuate as much as carbs. But this is a really good time to start working on, the aerobic fitness, which requires some fat. So you do need some fat. Fat helps you absorb the nutrients in all the nutrient dense foods you're eating. Some of those vitamins can't be absorbed without fat. So it's important to include that. But you want to shift your focus to healthy fats like olive oils, avocados, seeds, nuts, less from fried foods or packaged goods. But fat is important to intake and for your diet. It helps your brain, it regulates your hormones. It does so many good things when you have the right fats. And that's where that is key. So that's it's highly individual, I want to say, where your fat intake is. But it's still important to make sure you're getting enough of that.
Right. That's a good point. And especially, again, when we're coming off of a race block, when you are carb loading for a race, we're really trying to minimize fat in order to make space for the volume of carbohydrates you need to get in. So, readjusting your thinking around that during the recovery block, I think is helpful. Okay, so a lot of what we talked about today is very general. But we have some exciting news that Michelle is going to be launching personal one-on-one nutrition coaching here soon. So as we're talking about macronutrients, as we're talking about tracking your nutrition during the off season, but also during the regular season, Michelle is going to be offering nutrition coaching individually, privately, where she is going to help you work through all of this for you. I think the biggest point when it comes to nutrition, just like training, is that every person is different. There's no one path that works for every person. So we are very excited to be bringing this service with Michelle that is going to be similar to your run training. It is one-on-one, and it's going to be specific for you and your needs. We will have more information coming out about that soon. So stay tuned. Like I mentioned in the beginning, this is the first in a series of topics that we would like to cover. So if you have any questions about nutrition, about how to cycle it with your training, or any other specifics that you would like to know, please feel free to drop a comment or send either of us a message. You can find us on moremilestogo.com, and you can submit questions there, or you can leave a comment on this video directly. Okay. Anything else, Michelle, that you want to add?
No, I think so.
All right. Have a good day, guys. Thanks for listening.